Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're jumping right into a fascinating exploration today, pulled directly from the collection of sources you've shared with us. Our mission here is to, cut through the noise, sift through this material, and pull out the absolute most important nuggets of knowledge. The kind of insights that make you feel instantly more informed, maybe even a little surprised. Today, we're diving deep into the world of our emotions. Not just the feeling of them, but what they mean, how we navigate the tricky ones, how they shape our connections with other people.
Yeah.
And even their surprising impact on our physical health. Think emotional intelligence, recovery, and the quiet, powerful ripple effects of our inner lives.
That's a perfect way to frame it. The sources provide such a rich look at why understanding and managing our emotional world isn't just a nice to have. I mean, it's fundamental. They use psychological research and compelling real-world stories to show why emotional intelligence is often critical for success and well-being.
Right.
Whether you're thinking about relationships, work, or even your own body.
Get ready to see your emotions in a whole new light. Okay, let's start at the beginning. When we talk about intelligence, our minds often go straight to IQ, test scores, language skills, math, logic. Mm-hmm. But these sources immediately challenge that, suggesting there's a whole different, equally vital kind of smarts.
Right. One source puts it clearly. Emotional intelligence is really about skills like self-control, being persistent, having motivation, and perhaps most importantly, being able to motivate yourself. They describe these as teachable skills, abilities that are crucial for creating better opportunities in life, quite apart from someone's inherent academic potential.
And this isn't a brand new idea, is it? The sources point to pioneers like Peter Salovey and Robert Sternberg who pushed back against the narrow focus on just academic intelligence. Sternberg, for instance, found that when people described someone they saw as smart, practical, real-world skills were always at the top of the list.
Yeah, practical skills.
Yeah.
And even way back in the 1920s and 30s, Edward Thorndike was talking about social intelligence.
Social intelligence.
Right. Yeah, the skill of understanding others and knowing how to act wisely in human situations as a key part of being truly intelligent. It really makes you question the limitations of traditional IQ tests, doesn't it? If they primarily measure academic strengths, how well can they truly predict success in the messy, complex reality of life outside the classroom? These researchers argued for a much broader definition, one that aligns far better with what it takes to thrive day to day.
Speaking of navigating life's messiness, one source brings up the concept of emotional recovery. What does that even look like? I mean, how would you know if you or someone else is making progress on that journey?
Well, according to Dr. Marsha Rodson, a really significant sign is the ability to actually feel difficult emotions like sadness, anger, or fear without them completely overwhelming you.
Okay.
It's about accepting these feelings as they are, without losing control, and being able to look at them with a kind of curiosity rather than getting lost in judgment or panic.
Curiosity, not judgment. That's interesting.
Right. And another key sign mentioned is showing more self-compassion, treating yourself with a bit more kindness through it all.
That ability to feel wisely rather than being consumed feels crucial. It reminds me of that story in one source about the bus driver in New York City.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
Picture this. It's rush hour, the bus is packed, the atmosphere is thick with tension and just grumpy energy.
Typical.
But this driver, he's greeting everyone warmly as they get on. The other passengers are stuck in their collective gloomy mood, absorbed by it, right?
Yeah.
But the driver actively chose to express warmth and kindness. He felt the atmosphere, sure, but he wasn't defined by it.
That story is a great illustration. And the sources really dig into why we feel things the way we do, touching on the underlying physiology. They explain how our nervous system reacts instantly when it perceives danger or even intense excitement. It triggers the release of hormones like epinephrine, basically, a rush of chemicals that prepare your body for fight or flight.
Right, that adrenaline rush.
Exactly. That's your physical system getting ready to react.
Yeah. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Linking that physical response back to our thinking. The sources talk about the constant communication happening between the amygdala, which is like our brain's alarm system.
It's a fear center, yeah.
And other limbic structures dealing with emotion, and the prefrontal cortex, which is where we do our complex thinking, planning, and working memory.
Right, the rational part.
So when intense emotional signals like anxiety or sudden anger flood the system, they can actually disrupt the prefrontal cortex's ability to hold on to information. It makes it hard to focus, hard to remember things, hard to think clearly. This is exactly why, when you're totally stressed out or really upset, you might feel like your brain has just frozen. The sources call this a kind of neural freeze.
It perfectly explains those moments where your initial emotional reaction seems completely out of proportion to reality.
Yeah.
Like the story of jumping out of bed in a panic because you thought the ceiling was falling,
Oh,
only to realize a stack of boxes just tipped over. That initial intense fear signal, the fight or flight switch flipping on, completely bypassed rational thought for a moment. Your brain was in freeze mode.
so if emotions, especially intense ones, can literally mess with our ability to think straight, how do we learn to manage the particularly difficult ones? The sources offer insights and strategies for dealing with anger, anxiety, and even depression.
Well, for anger, the sources highlight research by Diane Tice. What she found is that effective methods people use to cool down often involve changing their physical state.
Okay, like what?
Things like isolating yourself until you calm down, though the sources caution that some men do this by driving aggressively, which maybe a brisk walk is safer.
We're safer, yeah.
Getting exercise, or using relaxation techniques like deep breathing or muscle relaxation. These seem to work because they directly counteract the body's physiological arousal that comes with anger.
And there's a physiological explanation for why anger can feel like it's building and building, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. The amygdala releases those stress hormones, the catecholamines we mentioned. If another stressful event hits before the first wave of hormones subsides, subsequent waves just pile on.
Uh-huh.
This rapidly escalates your psychological and physical state, creating a kind of buildup that makes it incredibly easy to trigger extreme anger, sometimes even violence. It's like kindling.
Okay, so that's anger. What about anxiety? Especially that chronic worry kind.
When it comes to anxiety, particularly chronic worry and insomnia, researcher Borkowicz's work is particularly revealing. He found the main problem for his patients wasn't necessarily high physical arousal, but the constant intrusive thoughts, the worrying itself.
Mental hamster wheel.
Totally. The only thing that truly helped these patients sleep was finding a way to clear their minds of worries and focus instead on physical sensations through relaxation. But what's fascinating is why people struggle to just stop worrying. There's a strange partial benefit to anxiety. It trains us to spot potential dangers.
Like a defense mechanism.
Sort of. But this constant chronic worry rarely leads to new solutions. It often just keeps people trapped, mentally circling the problem. You get stuck in the worry.
And then there's depression. The sources quote William Styron's incredibly vivid and painful description of the symptoms.
Yeah, that was powerful.
A profound self-hatred, feeling utterly worthless, losing the ability to feel joy, experiencing confusion and memory problems, a deep sense of alienation, and crushing anxiety.
It's devastating. And it also talks about rumination, that tendency to endlessly dwell on the causes and feelings of depression, actually deepening the depression. It feeds itself.
It sounds like a vicious cycle.
It can be. But the sources offer glimmers of hope and practical approaches too. There's the story of a saleswoman studied by Nolan Huxman,
Oh, yeah.
who battled depression by deliberately throwing herself into her sales tasks. By actively engaging in work, she redirected her focus away from her sadness.
Active distraction.
Yeah, exactly. And it had a double benefit. It reduced the likelihood of low sales, which could have reinforced negative feelings, and it built her self-confidence through accomplishment. The source notes that active distraction can be surprisingly effective, even though it's not always easy to implement when you're in that state.
I can imagine.
It also mentions prayer as a successful coping mechanism for some religious individuals dealing with deep sadness, finding meaning and solace that way.
Shifting gears slightly, let's talk about how our emotions don't just affect us internally, but how they ripple outwards and impact others. Empathy seems like the absolute core of that connection.
Definitely.
The sources share some really compelling stories about empathy appearing incredibly early in life. There's the 9-month baby named Hope who cried when another baby fell, and then 15-month-old Michelle who spontaneously brought his teddy bear to a crying friend as if to comfort them.
It's amazing, isn't it? These anecdotes, observed by trained mothers and studied by researchers like Martin Hoffman, suggest the roots of empathy are deeply ingrained, showing up even before children have complex language skills.
So it's innate.
Well, the capacity seems to be. Children might initially just mimic the other person's distress crying when someone else cries, but around 18 months, they begin to actively try and help the other person, moving beyond just mirroring the suffering to attempting comfort.
That transition from mirroring to helping is powerful. The sources also bring in fascinating research from Leslie Brothers using rhesus monkeys
Right, the monkeys.
and Robert Levinson working with married couples. The monkey experiment was striking. One monkey saw the fear on another monkey's face via video and reacted with its own distress, even helping prevent a shock to the other monkey.
Incredible. And Levinson's study with couples found something similar happening on a physiological level. He measured what he called physiological synchrony.
Physiological synchrony, what's that?
It's where things like heart rates and skin conductance would mirror each other while couples watched videos of difficult conversations. This mirroring of physical states was linked to more accurate empathy between them.
Wow, so our bodies literally tune in.
It suggests our bodies can quite literally resonate with the feelings of others. It's not just mental understanding.
And it's not just internal states either, right? We even unconsciously mimic others' facial expressions.
Exactly. Ulf Dimberg's study showed tiny, subtle changes in people's facial muscles, reflecting whether they saw a smiling or an angry face, even if they weren't consciously aware of making any expression themselves, like tiny echoes.
Huh. So we're constantly mirroring each other without realizing it.
This constant, often unconscious emotional mirroring and transfer is happening all the time in interactions. John Cacioppo, a researcher cited in the sources, believes this subtle exchange, often flowing more strongly from the more expressive or dominant person to the more passive, is a key determinant of whether an interaction feels positive or negative.
It's like an unspoken emotional dance.
That's a great way to put it. The degree to which people's body movements synchronize can even be an unconscious indicator of their emotional closeness.
This ability to connect emotionally clearly plays a huge role in our social lives. The sources talk a lot about social intelligence and how important it is for navigating the world.
Absolutely. But they also highlight a potential pitfall. Mark Snyder's research drew a really interesting distinction between people who are genuinely socially skilled and those he termed social chameleons.
Social chameleon.
Yeah, the chameleons might be fantastic at making great first impressions because they excel at mirroring and saying what others want to hear, but they often struggle to form deep, stable relationships
Why is that?
because they prioritize making others happy over being true to themselves. This happens when your social skills outpace your self-awareness. You're good at reading the room, but maybe not at reading your own heart.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It brings to mind the story of Cecil, who is academically brilliant, incredibly high IQ, but struggled profoundly in group settings because he was socially awkward.
Exactly. It's a clear illustration that textbook intelligence is not the same as knowing how to connect and interact effectively with people. Social skills are different.
Yeah.
The sources also delve into some observed gender differences in how emotions are expressed and understood, citing researchers like Deborah Tannen. Girls often develop language skills earlier and tend to be more verbally expressive of their emotions.
Using words instead of fists.
Right, using words to resolve conflict. Boys, on the other hand, may be socialized to suppress certain emotions like guilt, fear, or hurt to avoid being seen as weak or criticized.
Stuff it down.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
This might explain why, as the source notes from Ted Houston's marital studies, women often prioritize emotional connection and talking openly about the relationship itself as key to marital satisfaction.
Talking about the relationship.
Yes. Many men in the studies didn't seem to grasp this need for verbal processing about the relationship dynamics. For them, maybe doing things together felt like enough connection.
Different languages almost.
In a way. And speaking of relationships, the sources include a really sharp, even painful example dialogue between a couple, Fred and Ingrid.
Oh, the criticism example.
Yeah, to illustrate the devastating difference between destructive criticism and constructive feedback. John Gottman's extensive research identified harsh criticism as one of the earliest and most potent warning signs for divorce.
What's the difference then?
What sets healthy couples apart is that they complain about the problem or the behavior, but they don't attack the person. It's, I feel upset when the dishes aren't done, not you're lazy and never help.
Attack the problem, not the person. Got it.
And this principle applies directly to the workplace too, right?
Absolutely. The sources mention a study at Rensselaer showing how harsh criticism, calling someone incompetent or saying you never try, completely destroys working relationships.
Shuts people down. Exactly. Effective criticism, just like in healthy marriages, focuses on specific actions and outlines how to change them, rather than attacking someone's inherent flaws. As researcher Larson noted, calling someone incompetent immediately puts them on the defensive. They stop hearing how they could improve and instead just feel attacked. Skilled criticism is about guidance, not judgment.
This deep dive also brings us to a really surprising and powerful link: the connection between our emotional state and our physical health.
Absolutely. This is the focus of fields like psychoneuroimmunology, or PNI,
PNI, right.
which studies the intricate connections between our psychological state, our nervous system, and our immune system. Research in this area consistently shows that chronic stress and negative emotions can significantly weaken our immune defenses.
Weakens the immune system, like measurably.
Yes. One study highlighted in the sources is particularly striking. Redford Williams and John Barefoot's work showing that doctors who scored high on hostility tests back in medical school were significantly more likely to die by age 50. Regardless of other major risk factors like smoking or high blood pressure, their tendency towards anger and hostility was an incredibly powerful predictor of early death.
Wow. That's sobering.
And chronic stress can also cause measurable physical damage, even to areas of the brain vital for memory, like the hippocampus.
Damage to the brain.
Yes. And simple experiments cited in the sources showed how stress and negative interactions between couples made them more susceptible to catching colds and flu within just days, right during the virus's incubation period.
So arguing can literally make you sick.
It suggests your immune system was literally less able to fight off infection after a stressful emotional encounter.
But here's the truly good news, the flip side of that coin. Social connection is incredibly protective.
Yes, a massive 20-year study tracking over 37,000 people found that social isolation doubled a person's risk of illness or death.
Doubled the risk.
That risk factor was comparable to known physical risks, like smoking or having high blood pressure. Loneliness is physically dangerous.
That's huge.
And perhaps the most astonishing study mentioned is Dr. David Spiegel's work with advanced breast cancer patients.
This one blew my mind.
Patients who participated in weekly support groups lived twice as long as those who received only standard medical care.
Twice as long.
The only significant difference: having a safe space within the group to openly express difficult emotions like pain, fear, and anger to understanding peers.
Just talking about it.
This study is a powerful testament to the therapeutic value of relationships and emotional expression.
It really drives home why some hospitals are changing practices, allowing family members to stay overnight or making the environment feel less sterile and more like home.
Right, combating that loneliness.
Helping combat the loneliness that can genuinely hinder recovery. Training in mindfulness and relaxation techniques, like those taught by Jon Kabat-Zinn, are also gaining traction because they help patients become more aware of their emotional reactions as they happen.
Yeah, I'm noticing it.
And develop skills to manage stress and feelings that might otherwise worsen their symptoms.
Managing the internal state.
One of the most empowering takeaways from this entire deep dive is the idea that emotional intelligence isn't something you're just born with or without. It's profoundly shaped, especially early in life, but it's also something we can continue to learn and develop.
That's such a crucial point.
Erik Erikson is quoted in the sources highlighting how a child develops a fundamental sense of basic trust or basic mistrust very early on based on their interactions with caregivers.
Every small interaction between parents and children, even seemingly minor ones, carries an implicit emotional message. When these messages are repeated over years, they lay down the emotional foundation and expectations a child carries into future relationships.
Like programming, almost.
In a way, the brain itself is most malleable during childhood,
Yeah.
actively strengthening the neural connections that are used frequently, and pruning away those that aren't, a process that literally shapes the brain's emotional circuitry based on experience.
Use it or lose it for brain pathways.
Exactly. But this brain plasticity means the capacity for learning emotional skills is always there. Think about Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow test from the 1960s.
The marshmallow test. Classic.
He offered 4-year-olds a choice: 1 marshmallow now, or 2 if they could wait 15 minutes. That simple test of the ability to delay gratification, a clear form of self-control.
Willpower.
Well, yes, but also managing that impulse. It turned out to be a powerful predictor. Decades later, the kids who could wait scored significantly higher on their SATs and showed greater life success.
Just from waiting for a marshmallow.
It wasn't just about willpower, it was about developing emotional skill, managing that desire, that impulse.
Okay.
Other studies reinforce this idea. College students prone to severe test anxiety actually performed better if they were given just 15 minutes to practice relaxation techniques beforehand.
Just 15 minutes.
Yep. Researcher Albert Richard found anxiety significantly hindered performance, while his colleague Ralph Haber, who somehow managed stress better, performed well despite the pressure. It points to the ability to manage test-related emotions as a learned skill, not a fixed trait.
So you can learn to handle test anxiety better.
Seems so. And specific training programs show this can be taught. John Lockman designed programs for aggressive children, teaching them concrete skills like recognizing their anger triggers.
Knowing what sets you off.
Right. Practicing calm responses like walking away or counting, and role-playing alternative ways to handle conflict instead of fighting or yelling.
Practicing alternatives.
And the impact was significant. 3 years later, these kids were less disruptive and had higher self-esteem.
And it's fantastic.
Stephen Nowicki had similar success helping socially rejected kids. He worked with them to recognize and respond appropriately to others' emotional cues. He even used video feedback.
Video feedback.
Showing them how they appeared and sounded, helping them learn to adjust their own emotional expression to connect better with their peers. It highlights that even complex social emotional skills can be broken down and learned.
Wow, this deep dive really drove home the point that our emotions aren't just passive experiences happening to us. They are active, dynamic forces that are absolutely fundamental to our intelligence, our ability to connect with others, our physical health, and they are definitely something we have the capacity to understand and shape.
Indeed. From the subtle, unconscious mirroring of faces to the profound, life-extending impact of simply having a safe space to talk in a support group, the sources paint an incredibly clear picture. Emotional skills are far from being soft or secondary. They are foundational competencies for navigating the complexities of being human.
It feels like we've only just begun to explore what's possible when we turn our attention inward to our own emotional landscape and outward to understand the emotional lives of those around us.
And what's truly remarkable from everything we've discussed is that while our emotional predispositions might be influenced by biology or early experiences, the capacity for learning, growing, and refining these skills remains open throughout our entire lives.
Lifelong learning for emotions. So given all this powerful evidence from the sources about how profoundly emotional skills impact everything, our personal well-being, our relationships, our physical health, even our ability to succeed.
This raises an important question, doesn't it?
Right.
What aspect of your own emotional life feels like it could benefit from a little more curiosity, understanding, or maybe intentional effort?
Something to think about. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.